It was one of those nights when the silence felt heavier than usual. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every creak, every rustle, and every distant sound. I was alone at home, sitting in my dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the table lamp being the only companion to my thoughts. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, tapping their branches against the windows like impatient fingers. I remember glancing at the clock. 11:47 p.m. It wasn't too late, but late enough to make unexpected interruptions feel unnerving. The day had been ordinary, uneventful, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night. That was when I heard it. A faint knock at the door. At first I thought I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind. But then it came again. Louder this time. 3 deliberate knocks. My heart skipped a beat as I froze, staring at the door. Who could it be at this hour? I hesitated, debating whether to answer. My neighborhood was usually quiet, and late-night visitors were unheard of. Gathering some courage, I tiptoed to the peephole, half expecting to see an empty porch. But instead, there was someone. A shadowy figure standing perfectly still, their face obscured by the dim porch light. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. No answer. Just silence. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. My unease deepened as I stood there, waiting, unsure of what to do. A part of me wanted to open the door, but another part screamed to leave it shut. Something about the stillness of the figure sent chills down my spine. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, the figure leaned slightly closer to the door, their presence pressing against the air between us. That's when I noticed it. The faint sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from the other side of the door. My fingers hovered over the door handle, trembling slightly. I don't know why, but something about the figure on the other side felt wrong. It wasn't just the timing. It was the stillness, the silence. Normal people knock and say something. "Hey, I need help," or "Sorry to bother you." But this figure just stood there. I tried to steady my breath. "If you're here for something, say it," I called out, louder this time. There was no response, just that slow, deliberate breathing. I turned away from the door, my heart pounding. Maybe it was a prank, some neighborhood kid testing their courage on a dare. I decided to ignore it. I switched off the porch light, hoping the darkness would make whoever it was leave. But as soon as the light went out, I heard it. Scrape, scrape. The sound was faint but distinct, like nails dragging across the wooden door. My stomach tightened as the noise continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I froze in place, trying to convince myself it wasn't as sinister as it sounded. Maybe it was just the wind, or a tree branch. Yeah, that had to be it. But then the sound stopped, replaced by something even worse. A soft, muffled whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was there, low and persistent. It sent shivers up my spine. Whoever this was, they weren't leaving. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. Dialing the local police felt a little extreme. What would I even say? "There's someone creepy at my door" didn't exactly sound urgent. Still, I felt uneasy enough to have the number ready to call. As I stood there, staring at the door, the whispering grew louder. It wasn't just a single voice anymore. It sounded like several, overlapping, as if a group of people were murmuring just outside. Panic began to set in. Suddenly the doorknob rattled violently. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was trying to get in. I shouted, "I'm calling the police," hoping it would scare them off. but the rattling stopped immediately, as if they'd been waiting for me to say something. Silence filled the room again, and for a moment, I thought they might have left. But then, from the window near the door, I caught a glimpse of movement. A pale face, pressed against the glass, stared directly at me. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, and their mouth was twisted into the faintest hint of a grin. I stumbled back, dropping my phone in the process. My body felt paralyzed, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Who were they? What did they want? Before I could gather my thoughts, the lights in the house flickered. Once, twice, and then went out entirely, plunging the room into complete darkness. My only illumination now came from the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. And that's when I heard it again. The breathing. But this time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was inside the house. My breath caught in my throat as the realization struck me like a cold wave. The breathing wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the house. The air grew heavy, and the shadows around me seemed to shift as if they had a life of their own. I dropped to the floor, fumbling for my phone in the darkness. My fingers finally found it, but when I lifted it to call for help, the screen remained stubbornly dark. Dead battery. Perfect timing. My pulse quickened as I fought the growing urge to panic. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe I was hearing things, my own fear playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, this time louder, slow rasping breaths coming from the hallway behind me. I spun around, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaky, but loud enough to echo faintly through the house. No answer. Just the sound of those breaths growing slower, closer. I needed a weapon, something, anything, to protect myself. My eyes darted around the room until they landed on the fireplace poker leaning against the hearth. I lunged for it, gripping the cold metal tightly in my hands. The weight of it brought a small sense of security, but it wasn't enough to quell the rising terror in my chest. The breathing stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the sound of my own pounding heart. I waited, every muscle in my body tense, straining to hear even the faintest noise. And then, a faint creak echoed through the house. It came from upstairs. I glanced toward the staircase, the open doorway at the top, now cloaked in darkness. I knew I should stay put, lock myself in a room and wait for morning. But something compelled me to move. A mix of dread and desperate curiosity. I needed to know what I was dealing with. Each step I took toward the stairs felt heavier than the last. The wooden boards groaned under my weight, the sound slicing through the oppressive silence. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I stopped, staring up into the shadows. "Show yourself," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. And then, from the darkness above, I heard it. A faint, almost childlike giggle. My blood ran cold. The giggle echoed down the stairs, light and playful, but somehow wrong. Too distorted, too hollow. I tightened my grip on the poker, forcing myself to climb the steps. The giggling stopped as abruptly as it had started, replaced by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving deeper into the upstairs hallway. I reached the top of the stairs and paused, my back pressed against the wall. The hallway stretched out before me, the doors to the bedrooms and bathroom ajar, revealing nothing but darkness within. And then I saw it, a faint shadow darting across the far end of the hallway. It was quick, almost too quick to be real, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I took a shaky step forward, then another, my ears straining for any sound. The breathing started again, this time right behind me. I whipped around, swinging the poker instinctively, but it hit nothing but air. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled backward, my eyes darting around the hallway. A door creaked open behind me, slowly, painfully, as if inviting me in. The guest bedroom, the one room in the house I rarely used. Its door now stood wide open, revealing a sliver of pale moonlight spilling across the floor. And then I saw it. A figure stood in the corner of the room, its back turned to me. It was motionless, unnaturally still, as if it were waiting for something. "Who are you? What do you want?" I shouted, my voice breaking under the weight of my fur. The figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as if it had heard me but didn't quite understand. And then, in a voice that wasn't entirely human, it whispered, "You invited me in." My grip on the poker tightened as the figure stood motionless, its twisted head still angled unnaturally. The words echoed in my mind. "You invited me in." A chilling realization washed over me. Those knocks at the door, my hesitation, the strange presence outside. Had I unknowingly allowed this thing into my home? "Get out," I shouted, my voice a desperate mix of fear and rage. The figure didn't move. It stood there, its back still turned to me, as though mocking my helplessness. Then slowly, it began to turn. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if its body wasn't used to moving this way. My stomach churned as I caught my first clear glimpse of it. The face was pale, almost translucent, with hollow, blackened eyes that seemed to swallow the light. Its mouth was stretched into a grotesque smile, too wide for a human face, as though someone had pulled at the corners until the skin tore. I staggered back, nearly dropping the poker, as it took a step forward. Its movements were deliberate. Its gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I didn't invite you," I stammered, my voice trembling. The thing tilted its head again, that awful smile never wavering. "But you opened the door," it said, its voice a mix of a whisper and a growl. My mind raced. I hadn't opened the door. I was sure of it. But then, the memory of the rattling doorknob and my moment of hesitation played back in my head. Had I unconsciously unlocked it? The figure took another step, and I swung the poker wildly, the metal slicing through empty air. It laughed, a deep guttural sound that reverberated through the room. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice cracking under the weight of my terror. It stopped, its smile fading for the first time. "You let me in," it said again, as if that explained everything. "And now?" "I stay." "No!" I shouted, lunging forward with the poker. This time, it connected, striking the figure's side, but instead of recoiling, it simply stood there, unflinching. The sound it made wasn't one of pain, but something far worse. A low, guttural moan that sounded almost pleased. Then in an instant it moved. Faster than I could react, it was inches from my face. Its hollow eyes stared into mine, and I felt an overwhelming coldness seep into my body. I tried to swing the poker again, but my arms wouldn't move. I was frozen, trapped under its gaze. "Don't fight it," it whispered, its voice now eerily calm. "You invited me. This is home now." The lights flickered back on, and for a brief moment, the room was bathed in light. The figure vanished, leaving me gasping for air, my body trembling. But before I could process what had happened, I heard it again. 3 deliberate knocks. This time, they weren't coming from the door. They were coming from inside the house. The knocks echoed through the house, each one louder than the last. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, trying to locate the source. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential hiding place for whatever had invaded my home. "Who's there?" I managed to choke out, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. No response, just an oppressive silence that seemed to wrap itself around me. Then the knocks came again, this time from the living room. I gripped the poker tightly and made my way down the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the bottom, I froze. The front door was wide open, the cold night air spilling in, but I knew I hadn't opened it. Cautiously, I stepped toward the door, my eyes darting around the room. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing into the night. And then I saw it. Sitting on the coffee table was something that hadn't been there before. A small ornate box, its surface etched with strange, intricate symbols. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I approached the box. It seemed harmless at first glance, but the closer I got, the more I felt an unnatural energy radiating from it. My hands trembled as I reached out, hesitating before lifting the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I unfolded it, my breath catching as I read the single sentence scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You invited me, but it's never just one." The words barely registered before I heard a sound behind me. A soft, familiar giggle. My blood ran cold as I turned to see the figure again, standing at the base of the stairs. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were more of them. Dozens, pale, hollow-eyed figures emerging from the shadows. Their movements slow and deliberate, their twisted smiles identical. They surrounded me, their cold presence suffocating. I backed away, clutching the poker, like it could somehow save me. "Stay back," I shouted. But the words sounded hollow, meaningless. The first figure stepped forward, its head tilting as it whispered, "You opened the door, and now we're here to stay." The lights flickered again, and suddenly the room was plunged into darkness. My screams echoed into the void, but no one was there to hear them. When the lights came back on, the house was empty, quiet. The box on the table was gone, the door shut and locked as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Now every knock at the door sends shivers down my spine. Every shadow feels too close, too alive. And at night, when the house falls silent, I can still hear them. The faint sound of breathing, the soft giggle, the knock that comes from nowhere. I don't open the door anymore. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter. They're already inside.